Have you ever wondered why we believe in speeches that, deep down, we know don't make any sense? What happens when the very words meant to free us begin to imprison us? And what if the truth we repeat every day is actually the most convincing lie? All animals are equal. It's a simple, beautiful, almost sacred phrase. But what's disturbing is how something so pure can end up justifying silence, injustice, and submission. The answer lies in the power of language and in how willing we are to believe. George Orwell in Animal Farm didn't just write a fable about animals. He wrote about us, about how, tired, overwhelmed, and desperate for meaning, we cling to words like a person clinging to a piece of wood in the middle of the sea. And it's in those fragile moments that we're most vulnerable to manipulation. Manipulation doesn't scream, it whispers. It hides behind promises, hope, and apparent logic. By the time we notice, we're already following orders. Have you ever listened to someone speak with such confidence that you started to doubt your own instincts? That's exactly it. We live in a time when someone who speaks eloquently automatically seems more trustworthy. The elegance of speech has become a shield against critical thinking. The more beautifully something is said, the harder it is to see what's really behind it. Language becomes a kind of varnish, giving authoritarianism a seductive shine. This message is for those who felt something was off, but couldn't quite explain it. For those who found themselves repeating phrases that didn't feel like their own. For those who want to understand how the beauty of words can become an invisible prison, and how, even inside that prison, there's still a way to wake up. Today, we'll dive into Orwell's mind, but more importantly, into our own, because understanding how words are used to manipulate is the first step toward not being manipulated by them. We're going to talk about power, utopias, dangerous repetition, but also about clarity, resistance, and a kind of truth that doesn't need to be shouted to be felt. Words have smell, color, texture. Some bring relief. Others come as soft promises that gently stroke the ear but numb the mind. In times of collective exhaustion, loneliness, and hurry, there's a deep hunger for comforting speeches. And that's where the danger lies, when language stops being expression and becomes an instrument, when it stops being a bridge and becomes a trap. Orwell understood this. In Animal Farm, he shows us that control doesn't begin with force. It begins with sweet words, the kind that say exactly what we want to hear, the kind that feel like a warm embrace but slowly lead us into captivity. Manipulation doesn't need to be loud. It's calm, articulate, and precise. That's why refined language has become a kind of authority in a society where eloquence is almost synonymous with truth. Whoever masters form can conceal any content. It doesn't matter if the message is hollow. If it's delivered beautifully and with confidence, it sticks. And it sticks deep. How many times have we heard speeches that sounded like they solved everything, but in reality, only masked the problem? The right words, said the right way, don't just convince, they enchant. And the danger lies in that enchantment, because it disarms us. And once disarmed, we are dominated. In the novel, the pigs who lead the revolution understand this perfectly. Their early speeches weren't aggressive. They were inspiring, poetic even. They didn't need to impose fear immediately. First, they won over the hearts of the other animals. And once you win the heart, the mind follows. It's no coincidence that the phrase, "all animals are equal," was so powerful. It was simple, direct, beautiful, and precisely because of that, dangerous. When an idea seems so clear that it doesn't need explaining, it becomes untouchable. And what is untouchable is not questioned. It's repeated. Squealer, the pig in charge of propaganda, is the perfect example. He doesn't outright lie. He embellishes, adjusts, and turns lies into something acceptable. He uses emotion, apparent logic, and short, sweet phrases like, "It's for everyone's good," or "It's only for a little while." In uncertain times, few things are more comforting than hearing that everything is under control, even when we know it's not. That's the power of well-used words. They don't just disguise the absurd, they beautify it. Injustice takes on the tone of sacrifice, repression is renamed order, and fear hides behind promises. That's why the problem isn't with the words themselves. It's with how they're used. The same phrase can free or imprison, depending on who says it and with what intention. The beauty of speech can become a kind of varnish, a shine that coats domination in the appearance of virtue. And we obey because it's easier to follow something beautiful than to confront something ugly. We all have open wounds, and sweet words act like Band-Aids. They hide the pain, but they don't heal it. Orwell shows us that effective manipulation doesn't need to be brutal. It just needs to be beautiful, repeated elegantly, with conviction and with the right tone. The question is, how many times, in the name of a beautiful speech, have we let our guard down? How many times have we stopped thinking just because someone sounded too good to question? Every tyranny begins with the promise of paradise. No one submits to an oppressive system thinking they're signing their own sentence. The surrender is subtle, almost romantic, wrapped in speeches about justice, equality, and fraternity. In Animal Farm, Orwell reveals how utopia, when used with bad intentions, is not hope. It's a trap. At the beginning of the farm's revolution, everything seemed fair. The animals wanted freedom, food, and dignity, something noble, something real. They believed that without humans, they could build a better, more just world. But the real question is, who defines what's just? And who watches over those building that vision? The pigs, self-proclaimed leaders of the movement, quickly realized that the language of utopia was the most effective tool for control. Words like equality and justice became ideological shields. Anyone who questioned those ideals was seen as a traitor. After all, who's against justice? Who would oppose equality? That's the dark genius of authoritarianism, turning doubt into sin and skepticism into a crime. Squealer would often say, "You wouldn't want Mr. Jones to come back, would you?" An emotional appeal, not a rational one. Utopia becomes blackmail. The freedom to think is lost when every disagreement feels like betrayal. The most effective manipulation is the one that doesn't need violence. It only needs to make you feel like you belong. The animals didn't keep obeying because they were forced. They obeyed because they felt part of something greater, an ideal, a mission. And once the heart is conquered, the mind is weakened. The utopia they were promised was so beautiful that it blinded them to contradiction. When the pigs started sleeping in beds, negotiating with humans, and enjoying privileges, no one dared to protest. "It's for everyone's good," they said. And silence took over, morality bent, ethics faded. That reversal of values is central. Words like sacrifice and loyalty, which once stood for nobility, began to justify abuse. Everything was dressed in a sense of collective good, even suffering. Boxer, the horse, is the most heartbreaking symbol of this distortion. His motto, "I will work harder," sounds virtuous, but it hides a tragedy, the complete submission of someone who believes so deeply in the cause that he can no longer see the exploitation. Boxer isn't an accomplice, he's a victim, but a victim who becomes essential to the system that exploits him. And that's the cruelest part, when good intentions are turned into tools of oppression. Orwell warns us that real domination doesn't need chains, it needs faith. And when faith is blind, there's no need for repression. Obedience becomes voluntary, and authoritarianism settles in, disguised as stability. What Orwell wanted to show us is that authoritarianism doesn't arrive suddenly. With loud orders and soldiers at the door, it arrives little by little in speeches that calm, in messages that sound fair, and in symbols that promise belonging. The more seductive the narrative, the harder it is to perceive the loss of freedom. That's why the power of language is so central in Animal Farm, not because of what it says, but because of what it hides while saying it. The pigs didn't take control of the farm overnight. They gained power gradually, using persuasive language, offering explanations that were difficult to refute, and taking advantage of the other animals' ignorance or fatigue. The manipulation wasn't direct, it was wrapped in a sense of progress, of order, of collective good. And the scariest thing is that the animals, even as they saw their lives becoming harder, continued to believe, not because they were naive, but because doubting meant questioning the entire structure of meaning they had built. To stop believing in the speeches meant recognizing that everything they had done, the effort, the work, the sacrifices, might have been in vain, and psychologically, that is devastating. It's easier to keep believing a beautiful lie than to accept an ugly truth, especially when that lie is all we have left. That's the invisible prison Orwell talks about. Not the physical one, not the fences or the whips, but the mental one. The one we build ourselves when we give up critical thinking, when we replace analysis with repetition, when we let ourselves be guided by appearances instead of confronting contradictions. And what's even more disturbing is that those contradictions aren't hidden. They're there, in plain sight. The commandments painted on the wall begin to change slowly. One day, all animals are equal becomes all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And even then, no one protests. Why? Because by that point, language has already done its job. It has already twisted reality, confused memory, and built a version of the world that feels safer than the real one. The truth becomes subjective, flexible, moldable. And when that happens, power no longer needs to convince anyone. It just needs to maintain the illusion. That's the real warning behind Animal Farm, that our greatest vulnerability isn't fear, it's comfort. We are most manipulable not when we are terrified, but when we are tired, disillusioned, and eager for someone to tell us that everything will be okay. And those who want to control know this. They don't need to impose, they just need to speak beautifully. The elegance of language becomes the perfect disguise for control. It gives speeches an aura of morality, even when they serve the worst purposes. And in that subtlety lies the danger, because censorship doesn't always silence us with force. Sometimes it makes us speak without realizing we've been silenced inside. So, how do we defend ourselves? With doubt, with attention, with the courage to ask questions even when the answers hurt, with the willingness to confront speeches that sound beautiful but feel wrong, and above all, with the humility to accept that even the most sacred phrases, if repeated without reflection, can become weapons. All animals are equal is only powerful if it remains alive, questioned, updated, practiced. The moment it becomes dogma, it stops being liberating and starts becoming oppressive. Orwell doesn't offer easy answers. He offers a mirror. And what we do with that reflection is up to us. And even though all of this might seem bleak, there's something deeply luminous in Orwell's warning. If language can be used to oppress, it can also be used to liberate. If one story can lull us to sleep, another can wake us up. We have the power to choose which narratives we believe, which words we repeat, and what kind of world we help build with them. Change doesn't begin with grand speeches or sweeping revolutions. It begins with small choices, listening more closely, asking uncomfortable questions, standing up for what's right, even when it's unpopular. It starts when we choose to look with eyes wide open, without cynicism, but with clarity and courage. Because as long as there is someone willing to think, to feel, to resist with honesty and empathy, there will always be a chance that history doesn't repeat itself, that we don't fall back asleep. That power, this time, doesn't win through silence, but is challenged through truth. And if we ever feel like all hope is lost, let's remember this. Even in the darkest farms, there is always a spark that can be reignited. It just needs someone to tend to it.